Hello, everybody. This is Markos Moulitsas. I am here with Kerry Eleveld. Welcome to our special 2-hour election day show. This is normally a 1-hour weekly show every Tuesday, 1:30 to Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. I have to do the math. But this is election day. We have all this time to fill, and we're all so anxious, and everybody's so on edge. And we thought it might be fun to maybe pass some of this time with our wonderful community in this day so momentous. Thank you all for joining us.
And of course,
Kerry.
Yeah, well, we plan on going over all the leaked election results so far, right?
So I've had this sort of pet peeve for the last ever, where everybody talks about leaked exit polls and they act like they mean something, and they have never turned in our favor, Kerry. Never.
You had such a deer in the headlights. I just had to get it out there. I know it's the worst nightmare that we would be like, and here's all the leaked exit polling so far. Anyway, that is not happening. It's not happening. So
you know what's weird though too is it's there's been so many votes cast already. 100 million votes were cast in the early vote period, that even the idea of leaked exit polls is a little weird, right? I mean, I think a lot of these exit polls, and actually, have you heard how they're going to handle exit polling, given that most people have already voted?
It's crazy. No, I honestly don't know the answer to that question, and I wish I did. It's a very good question, but it's crazy. And of course, some of the polling that has been happening all the way up through election day, I think, is captured also some of these early voters, these people who have already voted. So I don't think they screen the pollsters in most cases. I don't think screen those folks out. So, but that's 300 million people is, I think, nearly 3/4. It was like 73% of the total vote in 2016. Yeah. So we're 3/4 of the way. We started out the morning, 3/4 of the way to our total count on election day of ballots counted in 2016. That is just insane. I think it's fair to say at this point, I mean, it's hard to know exactly, but given the lines we're seeing, I think it's fair to say that, this GOP suppression effort has failed at the very least, because all it did seem to do was stoke enthusiasm and stoke interest among voters across the country.
Yeah, one of the places you really see this in effect actually is Texas, where the Republican governor tried to limit drop box locations to a single location per county, right? And you have Harris County, which is bigger than 22 states, I think, in population. And then you have counties that have 350 people and the same number of drop boxes. And I think the reaction to that actually has goosed Democratic turnout. In 2016, Harris County had 1.2 million votes. As of us going on the air, they were at 1.5 million that last I had seen. Wow. And some county officials were hoping that they could even get to 1.8 million. That would be 600,000 more votes than in 2016. And for context, Hillary Clinton lost Texas by 800,000 votes. And it's not just Harris County, Dallas County, Travis County, all these major Democratic counties are showing massive, huge, record-breaking turnout. And Texas is changing, and as a result, it's becoming more competitive. It's a true battleground. But I have no doubt that those efforts to suppress the vote sent the signal to Democratic voters that, hey, they are actually worried about you voting this year. Therefore, maybe it's worth voting, and I think that's what's happening.
I have to say, I've been phone banking regularly in Nevada, and what I noticed a lot was once it came time for people to be able to mail in their ballots or go to early voting, I can't tell you how many people I talked to. I mean, this is just this is anecdotal. It doesn't mean anything, but there were so many people who, once I talked to them, had already mailed in their ballot immediately because they had wanted to make sure, or they had gone to drop off their ballot immediately as soon as it was possible. And most of the people I talked to also had early voted when we got to that stage, or had their exact plan, their exact day on early voting. So, the people that I talked to, and of course, this is not a random sample, right? But they were very, very tuned in to getting their vote counted.
Right, but it's not a random sample, but for sure you were giving a list of people that are high propensity Democratic voters to make sure that they voted.
Right.
And the fact that they had voted and voted early, I think is a sign. And the sabotage of the United States Postal Service actually played a big role in it. And we're actually lucky that Trump is so stupid that he telegraphs every single one of his evil schemes, because this could have been a lot more under the radar. And I tell you, every year until this one, I waited to the last minute to vote. Like, I was one of those procrastinators. I would fill out my ballot, but it would sit on a table until about a week before the election before I motivated to get up and walk 3 blocks to drop it off.
Right. Even here in California, we're like, get that sucker in. Let's, you know what I mean? Like, let's be counted before election night. I mean, that's, it's not like anyone's questioning which way California is going to fall, but you and me both. So just a reminder to anyone who's watching now, because we're doing a full 2 hours. I'm going to be here for the first hour, and then we have a guest host in the second hour with Markos. But we are taking audience questions throughout the 2 hour slot today. So if you have questions, we can't get to them all, but please feel free, if you're checking on this through Facebook or you're watching on YouTube or on Daily Kos, please send them in. We'll get to the ones we can. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you before. Our first guest is going to be David Neer. He's the political director at Daily Kos, and we're going to be talking about some of the key Senate races and some of the key battleground states. But before we bring him on, Kerry, I've been watching Donald Trump today, and he seems really low energy. There's a lot of loser talk. He said things like, it's been a good run, right? Those aren't things that you say when you have another 4 years under your belt. And so I've been struck by that tone. Is there anything about Donald Trump that either today or maybe the last few weeks that really has struck you as interesting, noteworthy?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, I will say, just to your point there, one of the things that we're seeing very interestingly being reported out of from reporters on NBC, MSNBC, and I also saw reports in Washington Post, was that the campaign is suddenly expressing doubts and worry today about its GOTV effort. It's like
great timing.
Peter Alexander of NBC, and if you can go check his Twitter feed, but he's got several different sources saying, oh, gee, we didn't exactly count on Pennsylvania being, we weren't prepared for Pennsylvania to be such a big state. I mean, who wasn't prepared for Pennsylvania to be such a big state? And then there was another really telling quote from someone saying, look, if you're banking your whole strategy on election day voting, then you have to ask people if they're going to be down for standing in line for 2 hours. So, I mean, that's just one thing. I mean, that doesn't tell us how Pennsylvania is going to go, but there have been several reporters that have gone looking for a get out the vote effort there, and they haven't found it. I just want to add one other thing that I think is important that's a little different, a little, tangential here. But one thing I think the media kind of missed on, Trump and these super spreader events, which he's got, there's been a lot of coverage of the super spreader events and a lot of documentation about how he's leaving a trail of infections behind him and even a trail of death behind him with these super spreader events. And people have said, oh, he doesn't care about his people. Well, that's true. But I tell you what, it doesn't really capture the essence, I think, of what is happening here for Trump. And I think Trump actually has kind of like been empowered by this idea of people being willing to put their bodies on the line for him. And, and he is actually, it's not just that he doesn't care about people's well-being. It's that it's like a loyalty test for him. And I think he's actually reveled in the fact that people have not, despite the fact that there's COVID out there and, they're really putting themselves in harm's way. He's reveled in the fact that they come to his rallies anyway by the thousands, and that makes him feel powerful. And it's just a sheer act of malice. And I think he's been gleefully undertaking this, round of rallies before the election day.
Right, Kerry. It's not just the COVID, and obviously COVID is so such a big part of that. But they don't seem to ever have buses to take people back to their parking lots. And one time you think, okay, somebody really like dropped the ball. Next time they're going to get on it. But I think we're up to 3 nights in a row, where that late night crowd did not have a ride back to their cars.
Right.
And so they sat there and there was hypothermia. People were going to the hospital. And there's something to what you said, because I could see Trump being absolutely gleeful that he has put these people in harm's way. And then they'll still tell that reporter, like, yeah, I'm still voting for Trump.
Yep.
It really must press that button, right?
Right. And more people will show up at his next rallies. You know, I mean, like, I don't know, his rallies may or may not be over. He says he might continue with them. Who knows what Trump is going to do? I'm certainly not gonna guess.
Yeah.
But you know, it dawned on me at some point that it was way beyond him not caring. You know, it was a path of destruction that he was more than happy and joyous in fueling.
God, oh my God, he really is malicious, malevolent. There we go, malevolent.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so it's time for our first guest. He is David Neer. He is Daily Kos's political director. He is in charge of Daily Kos elections. And our team of Wunder quants and data and analysis. And David, it's like 4 years of talking election, and particularly for your team, the last 2 years, right? Because after the 2018 election, and it does feel like we've been in a sprint, this never-ending sprint. How are you, and how's your team holding up, given that we're finally here on election day?
It's amazing to finally be here, and I'm doing well. My team's doing well. You know, this is what we live for. People like us are fortunate to be able to analyze elections for a living, but we would do it as a hobby anyway. In fact, I used to, you used to. You can't tear us away. So, you know, we are just a little over 1 hour from the first polls closing in Kentucky and Indiana, parts of them, and we're ready to go.
All right, so let me ask you this. There's so many states that are at play. The battleground map is huge. There are so many Senate states at play. Obviously, the House playing field is big again. Democrats are on the offensive. What are you looking at in the first hour to give you a sense of how the evening is going?
So that first hour from 6 to 7, we're going to see very, very little, because, like I said, it's only parts of Indiana and Kentucky that are going to close. The rest of the states don't close until 7, and the networks typically don't call states until after all the polling places in those states are closed. So I think it's really not going to be until the 7 o'clock hour that we start to see some real interesting stuff come in. And the states that we can expect to count the vote most quickly on the East Coast are probably going to be North Carolina and Florida. Florida, of course, the mother of all presidential swing states, though perhaps to be displaced by Texas this year. North Carolina hosting competitive races up and down the ballot: Senate, governor, state legislature, state Supreme Court, and more. They close at 7:30. Most of Florida closes at 7. So those are the two places that we really want to be looking at. And if Florida can't be called, if North Carolina can't be called, that spells potentially very bad news for Donald Trump. And when I say can't be called, I mean can't be called with most of the votes in, because those are must-win states for him. He really doesn't have a path, except in some real bank shot scenarios, without those two states. So look to see if they're being called. If Biden wins Florida, North Carolina, boy, that is going to herald a pretty bad night for Donald Trump. But those are the first two that I would look at in the early going.
David, just a clarification on that. Did I see a report that in North Carolina they had some problem at one precinct, I think, in terms of it opening late, and so they might push back they were going to hold polls open a little bit longer. Is that going to affect the timing of when they can, potentially start talking about results?
Yeah, that's a great reminder, Kerry. It appears that North Carolina might hold results for the entire state until that particular precinct has extra time to vote. So that could push it into 8 o'clock. But North Carolina is one of these states that does a very good job of pre-processing ballots, especially mail ballots, to get them ready for a count. So even if there is a bit of a delay in North Carolina, I still expect we'll see a material amount of results relatively early on.
Cool.
So, Kerry, we have a good question here from an audience member. Do you wanna handle that?
Well, I'm happy to
Not handle it. Do you want to ask it?
I'm happy to ask it. I don't have an answer for it, but this audience member says, and it's Cliff on Facebook, says, with 99 million people who've already voted and lines at polling places everywhere, does this portend a total voter turnout again, going past 60%, which hasn't happened since 1960? So that's a level of detail that's beyond where I've researched. Did either of you have a feel about what kind of total turnout we're headed for?
I think we could definitely, I think we will definitely set a number of turnout records. But the thing that I want to emphasize most is the reason why. And it's not just because people are either super pumped up to get rid of Trump or super pumped up to defend Trump. It's also because in a number of states, especially big states, we have competitive elections, places that really haven't hosted competitive races before. And in Texas is the best example of this. Turnout is through the roof there, and it's a state that's accustomed to being ignored. And what it really says to me is this is a major additional reason why we have to get rid of the Electoral College, because if you had a national popular vote, everyone would feel like their vote counts. The race would feel competitive from sea to shining sea, and we would have huge turnout nationwide. So what's happening this year is great, but if we want to keep it going, I think we really have to get rid of the Electoral College.
Yeah, no, Texas is a great example. I saw a number today that just blew my mind. And Texas, I think they're expecting around, 12, 13 million people to vote. Is that sort of the general consensus? In 2014, so we're talking just 6 years ago, only 4.6 million people voted in Texas. So we're talking 3 times, we're 3x the turnout. And yes, being competitive actually does matter. So totally agree with David on the Electoral College stuff. And there are mechanisms, I mean, people don't realize this, there are mechanisms to try to get around the Electoral College so you don't have to get a constitutional amendment. There's this thing called the Interstate Compact, which says, I am California, and California already passed this, says, I'm California, if Donald Trump wins the popular vote, we will cast our electoral votes for Donald Trump. And you have enough states that equal 270 that sign on to the compact, you have a national popular vote at that point. Not enough states have signed on to it. David, I don't know if you know the last number. I think it's around 160 electoral votes are currently represented that have passed it. But it is one mechanism that could be used to get around this Electoral College.
Yeah, and that is something that we are definitely going to want to focus on. And it's sort of a great segue because a lot of the other elections, many of which haven't gotten as much attention, that are taking place tonight, could potentially have a huge impact on whether we can pass this national popular vote compact, which only takes effect, as you were alluding, if states with 270 electoral votes join it. For instance, Arizona is a potentially key state. Democrats are fighting extremely hard to win both chambers of the state legislature. They just need a very small handful of seats. Obviously, Democrats expect to do well at the top of the ticket with Joe Biden and Mark Kelly in the Senate race in Arizona. But if they flip Arizona's legislature, and then if they can take back the governorship in 2022, then Arizona is a pretty solid mid-sized state that could join the National Popular Vote Compact and add its votes to that agreement and get us potentially close enough to implementing it by 2024.
Yeah. We talked a couple of weeks, David, you were on the show, and we talked about the Senate picture. And at the time, I don't remember what exactly their bottom line was, but my whole take right now is I'm looking at a 53-seat Democratic majority, 53-47. I'm looking at pickups in Colorado, Arizona, North Carolina, Maine, a loss in Alabama, and then our 3 next pickup opportunities, which I'm really hopeful that we get, and I'm hoping that we get, are Iowa and the 2 seats in Georgia. So that's my path to 53. What's your take on the Senate right now on the eve of finding out what it's going to actually look like?
My feeling is very similar to yours. I think that Georgia has really come on strong in the end. And, Georgia has this unusual rule. Pardon?
Yeah, no, seriously. It's like
Right.
it exploded.
We've seen late polls showing great numbers for Democrats, obviously a lot of enthusiasm there in the state. But Georgia has this unusual rule that requires a runoff in any race where no candidate wins a majority. There, in the regular Senate election, there's a Libertarian candidate on the ballot. In the special Senate election, you got 21 candidates on the ballot. That's almost certainly going to go to a runoff. But it's possible in the John Ossoff race, the regular election, that he could get 50% on election night. I mean, we might not know tonight, but he could get 50% now, which could avoid a runoff, and that would be extraordinary. But at the same time, if there are runoffs, which would be on January 5, and in particular, if control of the Senate is not clear, then I think it's going to be absolutely nuts. And the sums that Democrats will donate to both Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in the other race will be completely bonkers, and it will be the craziest 2-month sprint we have ever seen.
So let's just ask a slight variation on that, though. What if control of the Senate has flipped? Okay, and by like 1 vote, right? And then those would be the 52nd and 53rd. Then how do you think that affects? I mean, at that point, if look, fingers crossed, and I'll have got toes crossed and everything. But like, if Biden takes the White House and then Democrats have already sort of narrowly flipped, do you think there's that could bode well for Democrats in terms of there being sort of a depressed turnout from Republicans who feel like, man, we just got, we got run over?
You're asking the $1 million question. In 2008, there was also a Senate runoff in Georgia, and Democrats did very, very poorly compared to their election day take. And I think the big reason was that folks just breathed a sigh of relief. We had the Senate, we had the House, Obama won the White House, and folks sort of kind of thought they didn't have to work anymore. And I think that attitudes are completely different now, 12 years later. For one, Trump will still be in the White House, even if he loses tonight. And God, I can't even imagine what a lame duck Trump Twitter account is going to look like, but it's going to be foul, God willing. And so I think Democrats will be pumped up, but also I will personally be screaming at people every single day not to give up. We at Daily Kos, we've endorsed both Warnock and Ossoff. We will be raising money for them no matter what. And we have to remind people that if, let's say we get 51 seats in the Senate, that's a very, very narrow majority. And there are some folks in that caucus who will be obstacles to progress and change. And we need as big a majority as possible. And I think that's a message that certainly the Daily Kos community, but I think progressives at large will understand. You really don't want Joe Manchin to be the deciding vote. You want to move that at least a couple of ticks to the left if you can.
Yeah, I'm not worried. And this is something I'm quite obsessed with. Georgia itself has been sort of my great white whale the last several cycles. And the reason is in 2018, last time, we actually did have a runoff in Georgia, and it was a centrist. It was John Barrow, right?
Blue Dog Democrat.
Yeah, Blue Dog. And yeah, there was a drop off in Democratic vote, but it was very slight. I think it was 1 or 2%. And so given that in this case, the stakes are high, I mean, the ability for us to expand the Supreme Court, to eliminate the filibuster, to pass a voting rights bill, statehood for DC and Puerto Rico, these things are going to require a cushion. And I think there's going to be a good story to be told. In addition, having Raphael Warnock in the runoff, he is African-American. He is the head pastor of Martin Luther King's church in Atlanta. He is an incredible, amazing candidate. He's a superstar. He'll make sure that the Black vote continues to turn out. He himself is inspiring, but John Ossoff as well, the other candidate, if he's in the runoff, just went viral for a debate performance where he absolutely body slammed David Perdue. And so these are not boring, staid, centrist. demotivating Democrats that we've seen in the past. The idea that you needed one of those to win in the South, right? These are actually dynamic, progressive, aggressive candidates. So I actually see us being extra excited. And, we're not going to fully be done with this election until we cleanse it of any Republican possible who was part of enabling Donald Trump. And I think that story is going to be incredibly powerful moving into January. So I'm actually very hopeful that not only do we not see a drop off in our support, that maybe we outperform Republicans, given what they're about to face, hopefully, if the polling is correct.
You've always called this a long-term project. It is a lifelong project. It never ends with a particular election. There is always a further fight ahead. And no matter what happens tonight, we will be here for the remainder of that fight come tomorrow.
Yeah. Can I just say, I mean, one thing I know, I spent, 10 years covering the LGBT community. In one community that was immediately involved right away, trying to get, the priorities that they need, that we needed. I mean, I was there at that point because I was reporting, but I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And they pressed Obama from day one, those activists, it wasn't particularly popular with a lot of Democrats in Washington, even gay Democratic operatives, but the queer activists on the ground pressed from day one, partly fueled by rage from Proposition 8 passing in 2008 on the same night that, that Barack Obama had a historic win. So just immediate involvement, not letting up, can make a huge difference. The LGBTQ community ended up, against some odds, frankly, getting a historic amount of change enacted in the Obama administration. And I credit the activists for that. I was covering it. I wasn't part of the activism. It was quite impressive. And they just, from day one, they were in. So anyway.
Yeah. So David, I have one more question for you. And I know you have to get going. This is literally your World Cup, not even Super Bowl. This is your World Cup, right? The big thing every 4 years. So there's one more audience question from Campion at Daily Coats. He is asking, what do you think about the two odd congressional districts / electoral votes in Maine and Nebraska? And they also have they're both battleground House districts as well. So there's double duty in both of those seats.
Yeah, I think that Nebraska's electoral vote will likely go to Joe Biden. Polls have shown him up there. I think that House race is more difficult because you have a Republican incumbent who's reasonably popular there. And it's almost the reverse in Maine. In Maine, we have a Democratic incumbent who polls have shown is in very strong position, running ahead of Biden there. That's Jared Golden. In fact, it looks like Republicans triaged their candidate. So I would expect Golden to come back for another term in Congress. But I do think that if Joe Biden is winning by 8 to 10 points nationwide tonight, I think there's a good chance he will reclaim that second vote in Maine. So
David Neer, thank you so very much. Always so great to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. Good luck, guys.
Thanks.
All right. Good luck tonight. Hey, Kerry, he talked about when he sort of that last question, that last answer, he's talking about that rural electoral vote in Maine and sort of speaks to the problems Democrats have had in rural America. I mean, that has become sort of the Republican foundation. I know you've been covering rural America. This has been one of your focuses. And we are only competitive as a party in Ohio and in Iowa this year because there seems to be something going on in rural America. I don't know if it's lasting, but at least it's temporary right now for this election. What's your take on the rural vote right here on the eve of the election?
All right. Well, I wish I could say I had brushed up on this before it came on, but I didn't. What I will say is that I think without getting into percentages, right? I think what's happening in rural America is something that's similar to that's happened in a lot of these Republican stronghold constituencies, right? Like with seniors being one of them in particular, and with suburban voters. I mean, suburban voters are kind of have moved quite drastically, especially women.
Suburban women, yeah.
Yeah, women. I mean, even suburban men have moved, but the suburban women have moved drastically by far. But I'm just saying that these traditionally GOP voters, I mean, I think among seniors, it's not a bad comparison to rural America, where we're going to peel off some of those people. I talked to Matt Hildreth in one of my first interviews for the brief, and he's the executive director of rural organizing.org, and they've been working in particular not to win the rural vote for Democrats. They're a progressive organization, but their motto is lose less, right? Just make sure that we peel off enough of the votes that it eats away. And I think that's what's happened with the whole GOP coalition. The longer Trump has been president, the more that, all of the coalition is just frayed at the edges until all you have left is, non-college educated white voters. And even some of them have, turned away since 2016. So I do think that there is, I can't give percentages off the top, but I do think there has been some shedding of those voters since 2016, and in no small part because Donald Trump has had an absolutely disastrous record for farmers in terms of killing his trade war with China, and they spent decades building up an export market in China, and it just got completely ruined for them by Trump. And now all he's been doing is funneling federal dollars, and i.e. taxpayer dollars, to them to try to make up. It's practically a bribe to try and make up for all the uncertainty he's put into the market for many of these, for many commodities and many farmers. So
we have a question from Brandon on YouTube, and he's asking, what are the likelihoods of DC and Puerto Rico to become states in 2020 by 2022? And this is actually one of my most dear issues moving forward in the next year for several reasons. And actually, it sort of segues really nicely into our next guest. But before we bring her on, the likelihood just in general really depends on the size of the Senate. I think the House is not a problem. I don't know that there's a world in which Joe Biden wants to veto statehood for DC or Puerto Rico, right? So it's really going to come down into the Senate and overcoming the reticence of more traditionalist Democrats. It's actually not an ideological left-right sort of equation. It's a sort of traditionalist. So you have people like Chris Coons of Delaware and Patrick Leahy in Vermont, who may be squishy. I'm not saying they are, but may be squishy. They'll be squishy on other things like the filibuster reform and expanding the Supreme Court. So not sure where the Senate is. And Senate Democrats have been very careful not to talk about these issues too much because they don't want to give Republicans ammunition in campaigns this year, right? But there's going to be
you already do hear Republicans talk about this, right? DC statehood is something that they have been pounding on as one of the, fearful things that could happen, fearsome things that could happen if Democrats take over the Senate. But, this all goes back to what we were talking about with David and what we've really been talking about since we started the brief just a few episodes ago, which is it all comes down to the margin that, how much we can get done, how progressive the agenda can be, all comes down to the margin of voters, of senators, right?
And the difference between having 50 senators and having 57 senators is like 3 points.
Oh, yeah. It's right. It's right. Exactly. I mean, we could come out of tonight. I mean, any number of things could happen tonight. We could come out of tonight not having taken it, but we could come out of tonight having taken it by a slim majority, and we could have a blue wave and come out of tonight with some room to maneuver. And every one of those things not only gets easier to get done, like DC statehood, like getting rid of the filibuster, like potentially expanding the court, a voting rights bill, on and on and on. It not only gets easier, but it takes less time because you don't have to spend as much time trying to negotiate with someone. With
Joe Manchin.
Right. You don't give someone like Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema or whatever. You don't give them sort of veto power over what can and can't get done and what their priority, what, sort of pet projects they need to have tended to in order for their vote to be in play.
So the other reason that I think it's important to really talk about DC and Puerto Rico is for equity reasons, right? I mean, I don't think it's an accident that Puerto Rico is predominantly Latino, and that DC is heavily African American, and that they're both disenfranchised in broad swaths of our American political process. I mean, I think that is by design. Our next guest is Ashton Lattimore. I think there she is. Hi, Ashton. She is the executive editor of Prism, which is a Daily Kos affiliated nonprofit organization that is doing journalism focusing on underreported stories and underrepresented communities. I think I said that okay, Ashton? Was that?
Yep, good job.
Good?
You got it.
Can you give everybody sort of a sense, just your in your words, what you're trying to accomplish with Prism?
Sure. So our mission at Prism is really the way you described it, just to tell stories that are underreported in the rest of the media. So we focus on, Black, Indigenous, people of color, the LGBTQ community, women, just pretty much any group that's invisibilized within the rest of the media. And we put those stories at the center of how we're reporting. And that's how we've been reporting this election.
So you are, one of the focuses that you guys have is electoral
Electoral
justice. Electoral security, access to the franchise. Clearly, it's been challenging to get through a lot of the voter suppression efforts that the Republicans throwing against us. As we discussed earlier, I think some of those maybe have backfired. Mm-hmm. But we can't have election after election where we're dealing with these things. So one of the things that I've been advocating is the creation of a national voting rights standard, a new voting rights act. I think you and your team have been doing some work in this field, correct?
Yes, we've been reporting on voting rights and how they're showing up on the ground, particularly in a lot of different states. So this is a huge area of interest for us. And I think we're all in pretty broad agreement that there needs to be some kind of national action on voting rights to secure them, because exactly as you said, even in the case of a Biden victory, that doesn't mean the system worked. That means people overcame overwhelming odds for, what has been, I don't even know how many times at this point. So certainly there need to be some changes to the system if we're going to be able to actually make any lasting change.
Yeah, no, and Republicans they're gonna try to adapt to this. If they lose because too many people voted by mail, they're gonna be doing the best they can in the states that they have control to roll back a lot of those voting access benefits or gains that we made this year. So, Ashton, what would you like to see specifically in a voting rights, a new voting rights act, if you were part of that, the team working on that legislation in Congress?
I think the number one thing would have to be the return of the preclearance requirement that was basically gutted out of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby in 2013. Part of the reason for that was that these southern states, well, they've changed, times are different, they're not doing these kinds of things anymore, so we don't need this kind of protective element in the bill to keep them from suppressing votes.
So people that might not know, the preclearance was any changes to voting. Anything having to do with voting had to be cleared by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, correct?
Yep, that's right. And I think we need it again. And I think at this point, it doesn't have to be about the old Confederacy, because there are states who are doing this right now. They took the green light from 2013 and have started implementing different methods of voter suppression, whether it's voter ID laws. In this case, you've seen rampant efforts to suppress mail-in votes, to throw out mail-in votes. So there's plenty of modern evidence at this point that the preclearance requirement is something that we need. So that would be first on my agenda for a new Voting Rights Act.
Can I ask a variation on that question, which is, most constituencies have, marginalized constituencies have something that they're looking for on day one or very early. And since we're talking about voting rights, since we're talking about, people of color in general, do you have something that you're looking for that can be done immediately that could bring relief to people of color who have it's obviously a very broad constituency, so it's hard to narrow it down. But do you have one or two priorities that you think without legislation, the Biden-Harris team could get something done immediately through executive action or something like that in the early part of a presidency?
Kerry, it's hard, like you said, since there are so many different constituencies that make up that group. But actually, what springs to mind in terms of an executive action is immigration. A lot of the issues that we've been seeing around ICE, around law enforcement, around how people who are detained right now are being treated, and the fact that they're being detained at all. I think that's an area where the president has pretty broad authority that doesn't necessarily need to involve the legislature. And that's a place where you could see some immediate action and some immediate relief to what have been some, abominable conditions even before Trump got into office, but certainly since he's been in office and since the coronavirus has started to move through detention centers and affect the immigration system, that's a place where there can be a pretty rapid turnaround if that's what's on the agenda.
You mentioned the word policing, and of course, immediately, that's got to be, an incredibly large part of the work that you guys are doing, and I think much in the same way. I think there is some talk about some national action on policing. Is there anything? Have you seen anything that is actually worthy of backing or really giving you hope that this is something that will be addressed at the national level?
I can't say that I have, certainly not from any candidate for the presidency or candidate from, for national office. I think at the local level, there are plenty of folks who are doing things around defunding the police, dealing with police violence and trying to find solutions to that. But it's a very much a local issue. And I haven't seen a ton of leadership at that level, at the national level, no.
I guess at the national level, a lot of the hope there would be that the Department of Justice would take a more active role in investigating in a way that hasn't happened, obviously, in the last 4 years. Yeah. Is there something Congress could do, though?
In Bill Barr's defense, he's been, there's been a lot of other investigations.
He's very busy being the president's defense lawyer, so
he can't get everything, right? So, anyway.
Kerry, I'm glad you're the voice of Bill Barr. we are fair and balanced, right?
Yeah, right. Someone's got to stick up for him. Anyway.
So let's talk about that local level then. What kind of actions at local level to reform the police seem like the right, I don't know how to put it, seem to be like the best approach towards reform? I mean, is there anything that really is, that the reform community is coalescing around as solutions to this issue? Because from the outside, to me, it seems more slogan-y, right? Defund the police, but what exactly does that mean?
I think it means defund and redistribute, right? The police, you go to any locality in the United States and they eat up more of the budget than you could possibly imagine at the municipal level for, police pay, for paying out settlements for when police do violence against people and need to settle with their families, for armored trucks and other kinds of ridiculous things that you don't really need when you're policing, a community of people. So I think the key part to understand about defunding is that you're going to take the money that's being wasted, frankly, on police. It's not creating much more public safety, and redistribute that back to programs that actually meet people where they are in terms of what the community needs, whether that's mental health services or whether that's kind of other issues that can get at the root causes of what's causing community issues, rather than trying to treat every problem as if it's a police problem when it's not.
Is that the idea then, that you're not responding to, say, a domestic abuse call with people with guns, but with counselors or mediators or people who are schooled in de-escalation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you mentioned, domestic abuse calls. And I think another huge one is mental illness calls. Somebody calls for an ambulance for their loved one who has a mental illness and maybe having an episode. And instead, the police show up, or in addition, the police show up. And what could have been a situation that was de-escalated and resulted in somebody getting the help that they needed medically, now you have someone who's lost their family member as a result. So really learning to understand that the police shouldn't be transformed into mental health responders, but we can just take their money away and give them to actual mental health responders.
Which the scenario you're talking about isn't a hypothetical either, right? It just happened. Just happened. Yeah, just happened here in Philadelphia. I live in Pennsylvania, so I'm about 15 minutes outside the city. So this is, it's local, and it's not a new story or unique story by any stretch of the imagination. So that's I think an easy kind of way for people to understand what needs to happen and where the funding should go once the police have been defunded.
Yeah, you know what?
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Can I ask an electoral question since you're in Philadelphia and like, Pennsylvania is ground zero, which is just like, what is going on there? Because Donald Trump says bad things are happening in Philadelphia. That's what he says. And I take that to mean there's a lot of Philadelphia voters who are trying to kick him out. But anyway, I just, like, how do you get a sense of what kind of mood there is on the ground there, just between friends and family and things like that? I'm not asking for any, major predictions, but were you there in 2016?
I wasn't. I was in. I lived in Massachusetts, but I was actually on vacation in Utah that night. So very, very different environment than my home. But yeah.
Well, anyway, so how do things feel there?
At Prism, our team is distributed all around the United States, and we actually wrote these dispatches today, which should be going up probably in a few minutes, just kind of talking about the mood on the ground in all of our various different states. And Pennsylvania is so odd. It's such an odd place to be right now. Outside Philadelphia and in Philadelphia, I think good things are happening. It looks like people are having fun at the polls, dancing while they're in line and having a good time and going to cast their votes and not having too much trouble there. But at the same time, you have, in my county, Montgomery County, I was reading earlier, efforts to stop Democrats from helping people cure if their ballots have not been cast correctly. So if it's a naked ballot or one that wasn't signed, I think the Democrats were trying to call people like, hey, you can fix this so you can come in and vote, and there's still time. And just bringing more lawsuits to come, and the Supreme Court's reserved the possibility of throwing out the votes that come in that were postmarked before today but come in after today. So there's just a lot of uncertainty, I think. I think anybody's too wary of getting their hopes up one way or the other. Certainly in my family, nobody feels confident about any particular outcome. And even driving around the signage, it doesn't really lean one way or the other, even in this relatively left-leaning kind of county. So it's very much uncertainty, and I guess somewhat feeling bad for the rest of the country that we may be the reason that the results aren't known until Friday, because our ballots can't be counted until today, or in some cases tomorrow.
I mean, alternatively, you guys could steal the deal. So, zero status, possibly.
I want to remind everybody, this is important, that it is true that Pennsylvania cannot start counting its mail ballots. We're talking millions of ballots until, I guess it could have started at 7 o'clock this morning. Counting a mail ballot takes longer to count than a regular ballot because you got to take it out of its privacy envelope, right? You got to open up millions of envelopes. It's going to take several days. Several counties have even said that they're not even going to start counting mail ballots until tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so just want to remind everybody, this is by design. Yeah. The Pennsylvania legislature, which is Republican right now, got to work on changing that. They specifically blocked efforts to count the early ballots early. I mean, you have states like, Florida and Arizona, they've been counting the early ballots.
North Carolina.
Yeah, North Carolina. Some of them, even if they're not allowed to count them, they're allowed to take them out of the envelopes. Mm-hmm. So then they have to feed them. Pennsylvania Republicans blocked that specifically because Pennsylvania is, by almost every map, it's a tipping point state, right? It's a state that will tip things over to Donald Trump or Joe Biden at 270 electoral votes. And so the idea is if you block the count, you have this early day vote that supposedly benefits Trump. Mm-hmm. We'll see if that happens. And then they sue to stop the count, right? That was always the plan. And this is not no conspiracy theory. They literally said this, right? Donald Trump said this. They actually, one of the best things about Republicans is now the Trump Republicans, they tell us their plans.
Every time. We're going in with our lawyers, quote unquote. As soon as that election is done, we're going in with our lawyers. I mean, it's because,
Yeah, this is Republican created crisis. They did this on purpose. So it's not Pennsylvania's fault. It's not the governor's fault. It's not the people of Pennsylvania's fault. It's Republicans specifically trying to create chaos to incite the kind of uncertainty and violence that they think is going to help Trump retain power. Because he long ago gave up trying to win re-election. Mm-hmm. Now he's been working on retaining power. Ashton, what is, I think we're almost out of time with you. what is, if you can accomplish one thing next year, like if there's one equity related victory that you guys could come out of and say, we did it, what would that be?
I think it has to be a new Voting Rights Act, because that'll be a victory that makes all of the other victories possible.
We agree.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to hang my hat on and hang my hopes on and hang my energy on, pushing for whoever is in office next year.
Since you guys are about to upload some dispatches from around the country onto your site, what's the site? What's the URL so people can go check it out?
Thank you, Kerry. It is www.prismreports.org.
Prismreports.org. Okay.
And the content is also mirrored on Daily Kos as well, but prismreports.org. Ashton, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure talking to you. I'm rooting for you and your family in Pennsylvania tonight.
Fingers crossed.
And let's get out. Let's survive tonight, and we can live to enact those voting right changes that have to happen next year. Absolutely. Undoubtedly. Thank you so very much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Kerry, I've almost lost you because you want to go back and do some work or something, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I have some family responsibilities, so I can't full 2 hours. But you know.
So there's an audience question, Tom on Facebook. So I'm actually wearing my glasses to read these questions. I was trying to be vain and not wear glasses, but I've given up on that. How do we keep all these new voters after Trump loathing is no longer a motivation?
I mean, that depends on who you ask, right? Because there's a bunch of like old staid DC operatives who will be like, we can't do too much or we'll scare everybody off, right? Assuming that we, wins back some of these Trump voters. I think you enact as many progressive policies as possible. There is possibility. We don't know what it is yet. We don't know how much capacity, how much possibility there is yet until we know whether we've won the White House, whether we've won the Senate, and by how much, et cetera. But if we had a strong majority in the Senate and the White House, progressive policies are actually popular. Okay, they are popular across the country, even with some Trump voters, and you might never get Trump voters to like vote Democratic, but nonetheless, the progressive policies are popular. And I think the best way to keep voters on board with the Democratic Party is to get shit done. We got to get shit done and do it fast and do it, just be swift and certain and just do it as fast as we can because we might only have 2 years to get stuff done. And, one of the biggest regrets of progressives, but also, people who probably may not even know is how much more we might have gotten done under the Obama administration. So, think about, we had the chance potentially to pass a healthcare with a public option, and we lost that chance partly because of conservative Democrats and some conservative and Joe Lieberman. But anyway, who fought with Democrats. But anyway, I keep
going back. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I keep going back to Texas because it seems to illustrate like everything I ever want to talk about, right? We talked about how Harris County had 1.2 million votes in 2016. They were at 1.5, 1.6 million when we went on the air. And local officials were saying that they may hit 1.8 million, right? That's a lot of votes. That's 600,000 more than 4 years ago. But get this, if they get to 1.8 million, that's only 60% voter turnout of registered voters, not even the voter universe.
Right.
Registered voters, that would only get them to 60%. There is an incredible amount of low-hanging fruit. Now, like you said, you're going to have these consultants that are going to be like, oh, we must get those Iowa rural white voters that we got this time. We can't
alienate them. Well, I think they're going to say that. Go ahead. I think.
But by being progressive, if you surrender that Iowa voter for another 500,000 Harris County voters that finally realize, okay, this party actually is trying to look out for me and is taking action, you have an entirely different political map at that point.
I think it would be political malpractice for these DC operatives, Democratic DC operatives, to take a look at what happens this year and conclude that we still need to focus on the Rust Belt states, because that is not, and I'm from Michigan, right? But that is not necessarily the future of the party. And the opportunities that we get by doing more to focus on the Latino vote, by enacting some much needed legislation, like we were talking about with Ashton, about voting rights, about police.
Oh, it's low-hanging fruit. Yeah. It's former felons. It's enfranchising.
The map that opens for Democrats going forward would be phenomenal. And to just focus on, can we get a few more of these Trump voters who went, Obama, Trump, and then, maybe Biden. That's just a road to nowhere. We've got to start expanding what these operatives think of as the path forward.
It's a couple of years ago, you would look at the population migration trends, and you'd see that it was clear that Texas was going to gain seats. It looks like they're going to gain 2 seats. Florida might gain 3 seats. Arizona's going to gain. And then who are the losers? New York, Michigan, Pennsylvania, I think Minnesota. There is a real shift down that Sun Belt. And the idea at the time was, Democrats are in trouble, right? Because we had the blue firewall, those Rust Belt states, while Republicans were winning Arizona, Florida. Florida's always been competitive, but Arizona and Texas and Georgia were solidly Republican states. And now suddenly there has to be an oh shit moment in Republican land if Texas and Georgia, which are 2 of the 5 biggest states in red states, are now not only maybe battleground, but demographically leaning blue.
If Texas flips or comes anywhere even close, comes within a couple points, the way Beto O'Rourke did in 2018 of ousting, he was 3 points away, a little less than 3 points away.
200,000 raw votes.
Yeah. So if we come anywhere close, Republicans should be sweating bullets over that. And Democrats should start really upping their game with reach out, like we talked to Chuck Rocha about, right? With reaching out to Latinos and the Latinx community, and then also doing more to actually get things done for people of color, which has been the backbone of the Democratic Party for decades. So
yeah, you have the disenfranchised felons in Florida, which Republicans kept disenfranchised even after voter initiative gave them the right to vote. You have Orlando area, Puerto Ricans, incredibly low voter turnout. These are not really red or purple states even. These are blue states and Chuck Rocha, who did Latino outreach for Bernie Sanders, he says this, right? These aren't purple states. They are purple voting states, right? There's a big difference. And it's a question of expanding that voter universe and getting them registered. And so there is a shift. And I think trying to play, and I'm not saying abandon rural white Americans, right? Because I think the Democratic agenda helps them more than the Republican agenda.
Oh, absolutely.
But there is a focus and an attention that is disproportionate. And this is the history of America, right? The white people get all the attention. But that has to shift because we demographically are shifting. And it just so happens that these new, incredibly valuable battleground states just happen to have large Black, Latino, Asian communities. And so finally, I think maybe the interest of the party electorally and are finally sort of aligning with the map.
Right. And what's interesting is that after Obama won in 2008, there was a whole series of, political reporting about how the Republican Party was in trouble demographically, that they were going to be washed up for decades to come, et cetera, et cetera. And then Trump managed to come back, win in 2016. And then suddenly, supposedly the Democrats were in disarray and they would never recover after Trump, wooed some white voters away from them, white working class voters away from Democrats. But I think that series of reports after the 2008 election may have just been a little bit premature. And we are now on the precipice of potentially getting to where those reports what those reports had started to envision in 2008. We have a quick question. I just want to answer this real quick. We have Judy on Facebook says, what about Ohio? And, I don't have any special intel on Ohio other than it's very close. If you look at it, it's been trending a little bit more towards Biden, which doesn't mean that Biden's been up. It just means it's been starting to trend a little bit up towards Biden. It's right within like 1 or 2 points, even to plus Trump. And I think that, the Biden campaign adding a stop in Cleveland at the last second was a nod to maybe Ohio. Who knows? I mean, I talk about another just
seemed like maybe it was a move towards 400 electoral votes. I think more than no map. There's no map where Ohio is in any way definitive or declarative, and there's no dumb ballot races either.
Right.
In Iowa, you have Senate race, in Texas, Senate race. You have Georgia, you have 2 Senate races. That was a very interesting move there for a campaign that hasn't really done a lot of events. So, but it shows you that maybe they're like, maybe we can stick a dagger in these Republicans, and 400 electoral votes would really end the election.
I don't think they would just randomly do that at the last second if there wasn't a chance, because a candidate's time within the last 48 hours is so freaking precious that you don't just think, oh, let's just send Biden to Cleveland at the last second for the heck of it. I mean, there's got to be a reason you send him there in the last 48 hours. If they'd done this 2 months ago, it would have been different. But this is in the last 48 hours, which is a much different calculation for a campaign.
So, Kerry, thank you so much for co-hosting for this first hour. That went by really fast. Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Kerry will be back with me for next week's edition of The Brief.
Good luck out there. Vote. If you haven't voted, drive your people to the poll if they haven't voted. Do whatever you can. There's still a couple hours left.
Make sure your family members, friends, coworkers, that they've all done the work. So next hour, I have the pleasure of having as my guest co-host Kara Zelaya. She runs social media for us. What's your official title, Kara?
It's in transit. I'm the social media coordinator, but I've been producing this show and, hanging out.
Thank you so much. And Kara is also the other resident Central American in the Coast crew, right? Salvadoran right here. And I'm there. So I don't think we have anybody else. Maybe we should work on that. But I think we represent well. So, Kara, obviously you've been tracking the election. You've been following it closely. What is the thing that most excites you about where we are today?
So youth voter turnout has been my thing. I just recently aged out of being considered youth, which is 18 to 29. So it's a traumatic time for me. But youth voter turnout has been through the roof. I think this might be the first election in which we're actually going to be able to not take the brunt of the blame for not showing up to vote. Turnout is up 600% among people between 18 and 29 in Texas. It's up like 97% in Georgia as of yesterday. So who's to say? And right now, literally, it just broke that in my precinct of my alma mater at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, they have gotten 98% turnout at a university that has 60,000 students. That is like, how do you even begin to process that?
I'm speechless.
I know, right? I mean, Florida? I'm also the resident Floridian. I don't live there anymore, but I was raised there. And I know that at the site, we get a bad rap. And in my internal landscape, we also get a bad rap. But I'm praying. I'm not putting all my chickens in that basket, Markos, but I'm praying.
So actually, this is not a bad time to re-up that question that we had earlier about, is this driven by Trump hate, or is there something else that maybe keeps these youth voters engaged in elections moving forward? Because obviously, we always get killed in those midterm elections. And how do we keep those people engaged? Is it just Donald Trump?
I mean, I don't think it is. And speaking especially about Florida, I know that the Parkland activists have truly been at this for so many years now, since 2018, I believe, was when Parkland happened. And they have been doing voter registration consistently. You know, the young vote is right now more engaged and more educated than ever. They are experiencing COVID right now and not being able to attend classes normally. They are really, they care a lot about LGBTQ issues, about immigration. I mean, they're mad. And in fact, most youth people who vote young that I've been speaking to, my younger brother goes to the University of Central Florida. A lot of people on that ground are actually upset that things aren't even more progressive. And that's, you know, I mean, we're Daily Kos. We are like as left as it gets. And right. And like earlier we were talking about, you know, defunding the police. And it's like, if you talk to like Gen Z, or if you talk to even younger millennials, we're like, well, defunding on a path to abolition. And it's just this like such a left perspective. And I think that they aren't maybe as excited about Joe Biden, but they're like, we can hold him accountable. We can make him help us get to the places that we want to get.
Oh, God, I hope so. So, Kara, we have a guest, our first guest with you, first guest for this hour, Dave Newart. He's a Daily Kos writer focusing on right-wing militias. He's also probably the nation's foremost authority on right-wing militias. And unfortunately, David, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure to see you guys.
And I'm so sorry you're so busy these days.
Yeah. It's been a long 4 years, but the last 2 years have been insane. So yeah, and the last 2 months have been through the roof. I think it's going to get worse too.
That was the question, right? Where are we going right now between the Proud Boys and the Bugaloos and the QAnon and the utter sort of collapse of sanity and reason in that world, and Facebook fueling it all? Next year.
I was just reviewing you remember how Facebook had this big role in the Myanmar genocide, because basically they were empowering these government officials to spread all of this hateful propaganda, and boy, we're seeing them do it again. And yeah, I don't think we've learned anything, let's put it that way. And I think, you know, I mean, the thing maybe we should be talking about is these Trump trains and the situation with the, you know, that we had this week with the people surrounding the Biden campaign bus and trying to force it off the road and harassing him. And, you know, there are these Trump trains everywhere. And, I do kind of think initially, of course, my response will, how's that going to appeal to more voters? But these guys aren't worried about that. That's not what they're thinking about.
They're not shy Trump voters? Is that the...
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, not only that, I think, what are they doing this for? Are they trying to appeal to people? And I think you have to say no. I don't think they're trying to appeal to people. They're trying to threaten and intimidate them. But I mean, what kind of a closing message is, we can threaten and intimidate you and screw everything up, because I mean, these Trump trains have caused huge traffic backups too. They closed down the Mario Cuomo Bridge this weekend in New Jersey.
That's
yeah.
David.
Yeah, go ahead. I was gonna.
I think they're practicing. I think they're getting ready for after the election.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, David. You know, we're seeing right now that all of this is happening, and they're continue spewing this idea of the silent majority when they're being the least silent people on earth. Mm-hmm. What is your expectation for the next following weeks? I'm right outside of DC, and everything's kind of boarded up. People are really preparing. What are you seeing?
Well, I think, Republicans have a notorious propensity for projection, and they've been projecting all of this, but think about all the talk about how the Antifa, this boogeyman that they've created, is going to be burning down cities and causing all these nightmares. And of course, I think that, if anybody's going to be doing it, it's these guys. They certainly have been talking about it for a long time on Facebook. I think the critical things, the things that we should be watching for, are contested votes. I think that when we think about how these guys are going to be deployed and what kind of effect they're going to have on the election, I think we should realize that there probably are going to be contested elections similar to the Florida one in 2000. But I think there's going to be a lot more of them. And I think they're going to be, in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and who knows where else. We all remember the Brooks Brothers riot down there. I think that the way these guys are going to be deployed is, think of the Brooks Brothers riots with camo and AR-15s and don't tread on me flags. I think that's what we may be seeing.
So in these last, in all these years that you've been covering militias, has there been any kind of tactic or strategy that has helped combat them or win? Because I mean, it feels pretty hopeless, right? To see this sort of absolute absence of reason and resort to violence, and a sense that, holy crap, are we at the precipice of armed insurrection in this country? Is there any kind of strategy that can help mitigate that or defeat that?
Well, I think for a long time, people like me have been kind of pointing out that every state in the union actually has a law against private armies, and they're very explicit in saying that these are actually illegal organizations. And they should be, because these are just these are a bunch of yahoos who are accountable to absolutely no one. I mean, to no one. One of the reasons you have a sort of formal militia is that they can protect larger society, and of course those militias are always accountable to the people that they're supposed to be serving. These guys have zero accountability. And they're completely,
So is that answer then law enforcement?
No, the problem is we've ignored them for so long. I mean, these guys have been around since the 90s, Markos. That people have just kind of said, well, I guess they must be. We must have to have these things because the Second Amendment says of militias or something, which. That doesn't make any sense, actually.
Regulated.
So I think it's time for us to start talking to these states' attorney general that have not been enforcing their state laws and start cracking down on these guys, outlaw them. I think that's the one thing that would work. I mean, because, they call themselves the Patriot Movement and blah, 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 blah. But as I told the New York Times guy, you never met a more insurrectionary bunch of bastards in your life.
David, we had a pretty good conversation about a month back that people can check out on our YouTube channel discussing all this and your latest book. And we just got a question right now from Marilyn on Facebook that might have been when we were talking about youth turnout, on how to fight youth cynicism and nihilism. But how do you think that young people can be excited about the future when they are seeing these kinds of things right now? And is there hope that maybe with a different president, we can see a shrinking of these groups?
Yeah, I wish education would help. I mean, obviously, I think media literacy would make a big difference, because the thing that's fueling all this, of course, is conspiracism and conspiracy theories. And the only real way you can, I think, deal adequately with conspiracy theories is through media literacy eventually. But right now, I mean, I think we actually need to think about this differently. I think the illusion that a lot of liberals have is that well, these people would think better if they just had better facts before them. And we need to understand that people buy into conspiracism and conspiracy theories and right-wing extremism, not on any kind of logical basis. They're buying in on these gut-level narratives. And also, they're almost uniformly right-wing authoritarian personalities that do so, and that means that they're engaged in compartmentalized thinking. So I don't think that you can counter it with better education. I think we have to counter it with better narratives. I think one of the things that we've really let the right get away with for many, many years is just painting all liberals as libertines who are just anything goes, and you know, they really only they just want to destroy society and so on and so forth. And that stuff's got to end, because it's utter bullshit. You know, it's just utter bullshit. And you know, we need to be kicking back and saying, no, actually, we're decent people, and you should treat us like decent people. I mean, and ultimately, I think the only way you really combat this is get rid of Fox News. I think Fox News is the main thing that's mainstreaming this stuff.
So we have time for one more question, David. And I'm curious, as somebody who has really spent time with these militias, who's actually sort of embedded yourself in them, I guess you can.
Not really, but I go and cover them at their events. Yeah, I hang out at their events like a fly on the wall.
I've always found groups like that to be a lot of all talk and no action, sort of. And lately, there's been a little bit more action. Is there any sense that there's a sort of tipping point where this could all explode, or will they always be sort of a bunch of cowards in camouflage, acting like they're tough because they actually, and who haven't served in an actual military and done actual service to their country? How much of it is bluster? How much of it can it actually turn into real violence?
Well, I think we always dread the McVeigh effect, which is what happens when you have somebody who actually has a military background and experience engaging in this kind of belief system, people who have competency at handling material and arms, because then the threat really rises exponentially. And unfortunately, we're really seeing a lot of these guys who, you know, served in Afghanistan and elsewhere, you know, these returning veterans who are joining these organizations. And we had a plot last week with a Marine Corps veteran who is just a straight up neo-Nazi now, and he has been trying to lead this group of underground terrorists. Fortunately, you know, the FBI has been doing a pretty good job of tracking down a lot of these guys and busting them. But I think that there's going to be some people that slip through the cracks eventually. And that's where we really have the risk, is that, I mean, it doesn't take very many of them, and all they have to do is be competent, because you're right, most of them are a bunch of cowards. But I think that they're also, they are authoritarian, and I think if they see a trend forming that they can join, I think they will join it. So the real danger is these guys who are competent actually pulling something off that is, you know, a serious attack on our democratic institutions. And I believe that there is probably going to be some of that here in the post-election period. I don't know how you can prepare for it, because they do come out of nowhere. I do really hope that the FBI does its job, because I think they have been doing their job pretty well. And they catch these guys, including, you know, of course, the guys who wanted to kidnap Whitmer, and all the others that have been getting busted lately.
So, David, I think we're ready to talk more about this. And I'm afraid that you're going to be overly busy in the next year, and I wish you weren't. but we have to be vigilant. And thank you for your coverage and your focus on these issues. Thank you for joining us so much.
Bye, David.
Tonight. Woo.
Tough stuff.
Yeah, man, every time you look at David's stuff, it's scary stuff, and it's true. Most of them are sort of cowards, and they're playing dress up, but all you need is one, like that Rittenhouse kid, right, to cross that line, and people die, and that's the real danger. And the Trumps are going to be egging that stuff on, even after Joe Biden, hopefully takes office. Kara, I actually want to go back to that nihilism question, because that's actually something I have heard about youth people saying, none of this matters. It definitely doesn't impact me. So why should I care? Mm-hmm. And not just seeing that from like white young people, but people of color who are young, who are actually some of the most affected.
Yes.
By this stuff. And so what is your sense about that nihilism, and how do you combat that? That was a really good question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you to the Facebook poster who asked it. I think that really we're going to have to, as a party, we're going to have to start standing by the things that we actually believe in. Because I think this run to the middle has really affected this like nihilism question of things never get better. Both parties are the same in a time when the parties couldn't be more different. Yeah. And I think it's going to come down to our races that we do, our squads that we run, right? The people that we elect to office that are younger, that are fighting for the things that young people are really passionate about. And
so like AOC, and
Presley, Elon. It's going to be those women that we just named. They were the 3 women of color who are unapologetically progressive. Young people are really concerned about civil rights issues. They are thrilled to be social justice warriors. They worry about their economic safety in the form of the fact that they think that they deserve healthcare, which they do, and well-paying jobs, and an ability to go to school without being in debt for the rest of their life. And so the way that we combat that nihilism is by passing policy that makes the future not so desperate and so sad. It's difficult. I'm a millennial right in the middle. And it's difficult to see the statistics that say that I'm going to be less economically well off, statistically speaking, than my parents. And that has never happened before in this country. Yeah. So we shift that. And that's how we get people excited again, by seeing that government works for them.
Oh God, yeah. Okay, our next guest is, I think Jen is here. So Jen Hayden, Jen is she runs our trending news department. Jen is also like original, and she's been around Daily Kos from like close to the beginning. Jen, when did you start reading Daily Kos and participating?
2004. This is my 5th presidential election with Daily Kos. And in 2004, I was lurking, and actually that Kerry loss, I took it really hard, and finally I signed up for an account right after the election because I was like, what are we going to do?
And so everybody knows Jen was an immediate superstar. Everybody loved her, and nothing has changed in the...
I was going to say, continues to be.
16 years later, 16, Jen.
I know. Jen. We're getting old, Markos. We're the exact same age, and we're starting to get old now, so...
Yeah, my son turned 17 yesterday, and he wasn't born when I started Daily Kos in 2002.
Yeah, wow. I remember when he was a baby.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I'm starting to I was upset this week because I'm getting targeted by the AARP, but the most upsetting part is I'm actually interested in every article they serve me. So we've come a long way.
Jen, that doesn't mean you're getting old. I probably would find those interesting too. So it's fine.
Oh, look how nice Kara is. So sweet. Make us olds feel better. So, Jen, I've been asking everybody the same question. So, actually, now I'm going to ask you something different. You are in the Kansas City suburbs. You're on the Kansas side, right?
Well, I'm downtown Kansas City now.
You're downtown.
I've actually been living on the Missouri side now for around 11 years. But I grew up in Kansas 03, which I can actually see from my house here in downtown Kansas City still.
Can we carve out Kansas City and give it to Kansas and make that a blue state? Missouri is not using it.
Yeah, I wish. I mean, it's really unfortunate because, there is a street that runs down the middle of Kansas City called State Line. And it's Kansas on one side, it's Missouri on the other, and it is difficult. St. Louis has a little bit of that too, because part of St. Louis is in Illinois. So both of our major metro areas are actually divided by state lines.
So, and the reason I actually brought that up is because Kansas actually has a competitive Senate race, and the Republican is favored. It's Kansas after all, right? But it's actually been a competitive race, and we haven't seen one of those in Kansas. Well, we did the governor's race in 2 years. So there's something kind of shifting in Kansas. I think part of it is that the Republican Party has become so radicalized that it's actually turning people off. And people don't actually know this, but Kansas is one of the top 25 most educated states. And there's only 2 that are red at the presidential level at this point: Utah for religious reasons, and Kansas. So it's a highly educated state at a time when education is one of the biggest factors to that predict partisanship. So you're close enough there, and I know you have ties to Kansas. So what's your sense of that Senate race and the transformation in Kansas?
Well, I don't know that I'd call it a transformation. Because when I was growing up, Kansas 03 was represented by Dennis Moore for a long time, and he was a Democrat. So there is a history of this part of Kansas, being represented by Democrats. And of course, it got gerrymandered. And so that, divided up the vote. And I'd have to go back and look, but I think at some point there was a decision to kind of separate half of Lawrence, Kansas, where the University of Kansas is, and put it in a different district. So that really divided a main, obviously youth vote and college area, a more liberal part. So, Kansas has a history of Democratic governors and electing Democrats. And even the Republicans here, I would describe them as moderates, a lot of them, especially in the eastern part of Kansas, where Dr. Bollier is from. She's from Mission Hills, Kansas, which is, very close to downtown Kansas City. And it is, she's probably from the most affluent neighborhood in all of Kansas.
She was a Republican too.
And she was a Republican. And that's actually the kind of Republican neighbors that I grew up with. They're people who were pro-life, who were pro-choice, even though they were Republicans. I would describe them as socially, liberal people. Who, there's a lot of people here who describe themselves as fiscal conservatives and socially liberal, which is, of course, bullshit. But they think they are. So yeah, I'm not sure. Kansas is just kind of a lot more purple than people have really given it credit for all these years.
Jen, as someone who is an old school disappointed Kerry supporter, what do you think about, this is kind of a broader question and maybe not an elections night one, but what do you think about this makeover that George W. Bush has been given by political operatives, the news, short-term memory loss?
Relativity.
Yeah, relativity. I mean, it's it's easy. There's some trauma, you have a natural ability to kind of put trauma away. I had, for instance, I'm a cancer survivor. I had double mastectomy. I don't remember hardly any of it. Right. So I think people have kind of taken George W. Bush in those years, and put it aside for now because, it looks like the whole Bush family is basically voting for Joe Biden now. I mean,
yeah, I think the Bushes were really fixated. Their violence was fixated outwards, right? It was about starting wars, and Trump the violence is focused inward on his growing list of enemies.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say about the Kerry thing is I was reminded. I think I mentioned this to you in Slack, Markos, but I was reminded in 2004 when I went to a Kerry rally that was at the downtown city airport, and he was 3 hours late, and you had to get bussed in there, and elderly people were passing out because that day was extremely hot and there was no water. There was one soda machine for thousands of people who were stranded there in the heat. And this is really reminiscent of what we went through to see John Kerry in 2004. And hopefully it goes the same way for Trump.
But did John Kerry do that again and then a third time?
I don't know.
Because he got kicks off it or something?
Well, the other thing that he did that year was they were doing like a train tour at one point, and they were supposed to stop in Lawrence, Kansas. And so they had all these thousands of people, you know, that were out there waiting for the train, and then the train just blasted right by everybody. Like that really happened here. Yeah. And I think they sent John Edwards back later to do like, you know.
We don't need to talk about John Edwards.
Really, the story gets worse and worse.
I know.
Let's wrap it up like with that on that thought and be like, isn't it amazing how far as a party we've come as organizers? It's so much better now.
That's right.
So, Kerry, I interrupted you. We were about to ask a question.
Yeah, we have an audience question for Jen. And the question is, where do you see, where was the swamp exactly drained to? And this is from GLB3 on Daily Kos.
Yeah, I know exactly where it went. It went right into Donald Trump's pocket.
Yep, sounds right.
The swamp was actually just funneled right into his pocket.
You can tell by his girth.
Yeah.
Markos.
It's I mean, it's a little pond out back at Mar-a-Lago now. That's where the swamp is.
Great. Love that.
Yeah.
It is quite amazing how he's tried so hard to turn Biden into the corrupt one when Biden is squeaky clean. I mean, there is nothing.
No, listen, Joe Biden was not my preferred candidate. In fact, he's no question whatsoever that he's been the absolute perfect candidate against Donald Trump, because I can imagine Warren would have just been a lightning rod. The misogyny and the sexism that we saw in 2016 would have definitely been at play again.
Ohio, Iowa, they would not be in play. I actually think we'd be maybe heading towards a victory, but it would be nowhere as big as it seems. A couple hours from polls closing. Not ready to declare victory.
And that's one of the reasons that the lightning rod has become Kamala Harris, right? Because she's a woman, because she's a woman of color, because she's a Black woman. That's the person that Donald Trump has shifted his radical leftist message to, because no one's going to buy that Joe Biden's a radical anything.
Donald Trump has not been able to lay a glove on Biden this entire time. Yeah. It's been great.
He doesn't even look, I mean, lately he was a little more motivated, but I think it's harder for him to get really riled up about a white man. And one that actually kind of looks like him as well. Because he, you could see how he digs into the Pocahontas racial slurs. And
I think that's the meanest thing you've ever said about Joe Biden, by the way. Is that he looks like Donald Trump.
I've said some pretty mean things about Joe Biden, but he was about number 13 on my list. But I will say this, that he was chosen by Black Democrats. Clearly, they said, you know what? There's too much at stake. We ain't gonna mess around. We'd love to have Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren. They all, had great ratings with Black Democrats, but they overwhelmingly voted for Joe Biden because they're like, we can't take the risk. And you gotta say, given what we've seen to this point, that it was the right call.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's kind of that old political adage, like trust Black women. Black women trust Black women. That's something that I live by. And I think that as a party, we need to do better by, and not just every 2 years be like, oh, please, Black women save us. But they chose Joe Biden overwhelmingly, and it was the right call. Especially, I mean, who could have predicted the pandemic? Joe Biden, with his ability to just really feel people's pain and his own tragic path, has been monumental.
That is his strength, undoubtedly. That is his empathy. He is and for sure. And there's a scenario where we've accelerated, because of Donald Trump and because Joe Biden is as inoffensive as he is, accelerated the turning blue of Texas and Florida, Texas, Georgia, Arizona. And that gives us more room in 4 to 8 years to actually have that all-woman ticket, which is really like, all-woman ticket, get elected, and then I can actually retire from politics. That's the thing that's keeping me engaged.
You better take me with you.
No, this is a long-term project.
We came in together. We're going out together.
You can't abandon me. I'm going to be alive for like another 100 years.
Abandon you? There's a baton. There's a baton. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things I actually don't. It's funny. We're going to talk about generations and youth. Yeah. Is I don't like when progressive leaders stick around too long. Yeah. It's always bothered me, and I don't intend to be that person. So there will be a place, there'll be a time when I no longer have enough to offer, or I'm outdated, and I'm already getting a little close on some things. I'm starting to feel like a curmudgeon at times, and nobody wants to be a curmudgeon. So I'm ready for the baton, but I want that all-woman ticket.
Well, you know what? My, one of my stepdaughters in 2016, when we were, dissecting this, and we were upset afterwards, and she said, she became a political science major in college after that. And she said, I hope you don't feel like I'm stepping on your toes. And I said, no, I got into this because I wanted to make change, and after 2016, I felt really low, like I felt like I had really let everything down. But then I took a step back and I said, what if the change that I made was in her? What if she's the one who's going to go out and do it? You guys are the ones who are going to go out and do it. Maybe we help lay the foundation for that a little bit. But you guys are really the ones who have to take it to the next level.
I will say similarly, on election night 4 years ago, I was going to write an entire diary about it on our site, but I ran out of time. 4 years ago, I was at the Javits Center, and I was getting my MBA in New York City. I could not have been more of a finance bro, despite having, I was in the arts, despite having worked for Obama in 2012. And that night, it was the change of my life. On January of 2017, I enrolled in a Master's of Elections and Campaign Management, and now I'm here. So I think a lot of people a lot of my friends fully shifted their careers for a life of service and work. And, it's not just, I always tell people, I'm like, it's not just that I want to help people. It's that I like being a part of a community, and it's super fun. So,
yeah.
So Jen, we're almost out of time with you. I have one more question for you on the way out. Does Donald Trump, assuming he loses, does he flee the country or not?
$400
million, which he can't afford. He's personally.
Let me tell you,
that $400 million.
Yeah, I actually think he probably is going to have to flee the country because he won't be able to control what's happening at the DOJ. Department of Justice, they've got some pokers in the fire, I think, already. And when we get an attorney general in there, I think that there's a lot of cases where he's in trouble, and especially in New York and, in other states where I think he's really going to be in trouble with tax fraud.
He can't pardon himself out of New York.
I mean, you saw even Deutsche Bank is like, we got to get away from this guy. So I think there's a strong possibility he ends up, leaving the country. So we'll find out. I look forward to finding out.
Yes. Jen, thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure.
All right.
You can catch Jen's work at Daily Kos. She's a brilliant writer. She's freaking hilarious, as you've seen, and an original Daily Kos crew adore her. So, Kara, what do you think Donald Trump's going to do if he loses the election?
I just hope he doesn't set my home state of Florida on fire. That's all I want. My bar is so low, Markos. I hope he gets incarcerated. That's what I hope, but I don't know what he's going to do. Incite violence for a couple of weeks, for sure. There's been talk of him, wanting to continue the Trump rallies. But a friend of mine who is a dear friend of mine and is a campaign expert and lawyer, voter protections lawyer, and he was telling me, he's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he concedes. And that's what I want to tell everyone.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, because on January 20th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are going to have a new president if all goes well tonight. So he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, it's he's been very low energy. Yesterday, today, he's not getting the news he wants to get. Now, he also was low energy in 2016 because he thought he was going to lose, right? So just because he thinks he's going to lose doesn't mean he's going to lose. So again, we're not celebrating just yet. But best case scenario is he loses by 350, 400 electoral votes, and nobody wants to hang out with a loser.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to hang out with a loser, right? Yeah. Like his own stench, I think, would be too much for him. And you see him talking about, I can't believe I'm losing to the worst candidate ever.
And I mean, he's talked about also starting his own media organization. I believe there were reports of that plan 4 years ago, that's what he wanted to do, with the new Trump network or whatever.
The problem he has is that, well, he's $400 million, which he's personally guaranteed. He doesn't have that money, period. Then he has a dozen criminal cases against him. Who knows how many more will come out once you start digging into this administration. You have... I think Melania is going to freaking bolt.
Yeah. That's for sure. And write a book.
So yeah, who needs a, whatever prenuptial agreement they have, who cares? She'll make it all back in a book. I mean, she'll be fine. So things are about to get really dark for him. I don't see how he keeps up the energy to do rallies when that fire isn't there. I think in a perfect world, we didn't have all that hanging over him. He would run for president again. I think that would he wouldn't stop. Absolutely. I just don't think he's going to have that opportunity to do so with all these sort of chickens coming home to roost. Yeah. So when you talk about that media organization, that's the last. When has he surrounded himself with people who know what they're doing?
Never, not once.
Never. I mean, he won Pennsylvania in 2016 because he didn't have, it wasn't his campaign. It was whatever the Republican National Committee had. He took all that over, and Brad Perscali actually built the turnout operation that nobody's been able to find in Pennsylvania. And again, we're not declaring victory just yet, but anecdotally, everybody's like, where's this Trump organization, because it's a grift. Everybody around him is a criminal. It's all a grift. So I love this.
And the Republican Party, too, that made George W. Bush and really, to what I brought up earlier, really created the sort of Fox News propaganda machine. They're getting older. So they're exiting the electorate, as I like to say.
Yes, that's.
I think that's a euphemism, actually.
It's a Drew Linzer, who's the head of civics, our data polling division, and I've adopted it for myself because I love it. It's a very polite way of saying people die.
Yeah. And,
exiting the electorate. So we have our final guest for the evening. I think it's time. I got my little cheat. Yep, it's time. So please welcome Carolyn Fiddler. She is comms director, also one of the nation's foremost authorities on state legislatures. And she's a former guest. She is, there she is. Hi, Carolyn.
Hey,
Carolyn.
Carolyn. So what are you've been online for the last hour and a half, and I haven't. So what great news have rumors and innuendos and fake exit polling, and what's your sense of where the election is right now?
That's a really good question. I think the polls are about to start closing, and that's when things start to get really weird in terms of cable news coverage and people started making predictions on Twitter and things like that. I've gotten a few questions about Virginia, about allegedly low turnout in Democratic strongholds like Fairfax and Arlington counties. So people are already starting to, read crazy tea leaves. Was
there an early vote in Virginia?
Oh yeah, it was, and it was and this is the first year it was super easy to do. It was in previous years, you needed an excuse to vote absentee, mail-in, early, whatever. This year, you don't need to. You don't need to sign an affidavit saying, I can't get into the poll station. It was very strenuous. So yeah. But, Biden's going to win Virginia, so everyone needs to calm down.
And Mark Warner he's actually running for Senate, which I think is a thing that nobody knows. Which is a good thing.
He's been running ads in Northern Virginia on TV, that's for sure.
I was going to say, you're talking to two Virginians right now, basically.
Nobody. I was like, oh my God, Mark Warner's running for re-election? Was it 6 years ago he won by 1.5 points?
Yeah. No, oh my gosh, I remember that night.
Yes. And now it's did the Republicans even put up a candidate against them? Did he raise any money?
They absolutely have a candidate.
They have a warm body.
The closing ad is more like a Biden ad, honestly. It has less to do with his election than just this is an election for the soul of the country. Like that.
Carolyn, Carolyn, as a specifically Virginia expert, I was talking last night to Sawyer Hackett, who is Julian Castro's senior advisor, and they've been doing a lot of work in Texas. And he was talking about, he's also a Virginian, and he was talking about how Virginia is the story that we could be telling about Texas and Georgia in the future. And I wanted to touch base with you and hear what you think about that.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is a great point of comparison, especially because I am old enough to remember when the idea of a Democratic presidential candidate winning Virginia was silly. I remember when Democrats were run out of power in the legislature and Republicans took over. And of course, as we know, a year ago, Democrats finally took back over trifecta control of the state legislature. And it took 20 years. It's not going to be a short road for places like Texas. Kentucky might end up in this boat down the line. Georgia, certainly. But a lot of it has to do with what happens tonight, especially in a place like Texas. Democrats could end up flipping the state house there, which would be really important because that would keep Republicans from completely controlling the next round of redistricting. And that would lead to fairer maps in that state, which would actually let the emerging progressive electorate in Texas have their voices heard instead of drawn into, terrible districts for another decade.
Yeah, and some people don't realize this, but when you talk about drawing maps, you're talking both at the state level, the state legislature, and also for Congress. And I think a lot of people think Congress when you think about redrawing maps, but also the state legislature. And in places like Virginia, where you have a Democratic legislature, it was difficult. It took that long, in large part because you were working with Republican maps.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, either Democrats have a chance to sort of even that playing field a little bit for the next 10 years in Texas, or it's back to not quite square one because the Democratic electorate in Texas has grown over the past couple of cycles, but it's going to be a very long, hard slog in a place like Texas. And in Georgia, where Democrats realistically don't have a very good chance of flipping either chamber this year, they're going to be back to square one. Republicans will redraw districts in a way that, better fits their needs as the minority party effectively in that state over time, and will help slow the progress of Democrats for the next 10 years there.
Yeah.
Carolyn, I have a question from Hope for the Future, great name, on Daily Kos. And they ask, even if Biden wins by a solid margin, there will still be more than 40% of our population who supports him and his approach of governing. Over 60 million people. What challenges does that pose for American democracy, and what can we do about it?
That's a great question. I love that question because the best answer to that is my favorite thing in the world, which is state legislative elections. Pay closer attention to your local races, not just today, not just this year. Just because we're about to go through the next round of redistricting doesn't make these offices and these elections any less important for the coming 10 years, especially with the Supreme Court the way it is right now. Until that gets adjusted and rebalanced, any progress that is made on the federal level probably has an expiration date. The court's probably going to strike it down. So we're going to look at progress being made at the state level. State legislatures will primarily be implementing whatever, hopefully, President Joe Biden will want to do in their states. They'll be doing sort of the grunt work. They will be echoing federal policy and probably moving it more quickly than it's going to move through Congress anyway, because it's slow here in DC. So these, I've been, waiting for the entire decade. I was at the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee in 2010 and watched Republicans flip 21 chambers in a single night right before that round of redistricting, leading to a decade of unearned Republican majorities in a lot of places. So we're, Democrats have made progress and winning on Republican maps all over the country for the last 10 years. But just because we're about to redraw all these districts again doesn't mean it's over. And I am concerned that Democrats will take their eye off the ball again.
So one of the things that's really encouraging this time around is sort of the focus that Democratic activists have put on those lower state level races. And you see that a lot in the Act Blue numbers, right? Where you have Senate candidates now, raising presidential level money. I mean, Jamie Harrison raised $56 million in a quarter. You have House candidates racing what Senate candidates used to race. And you have state legislative candidates racing what House candidates used to race, right? We've been seeing $1 million quarters from state legislative candidates. Can you tell us just what they used to race and like what, how far we've come?
Yeah, well, it varies a lot from state to state because every state legislature is its own little Congress, and every state's districts are different sizes. Like a state house race in, say, New Hampshire is going to cost a lot less than a state house race.
There's like 7,000 of them.
400, but yeah, it's you're comparing apples and Volvos when you're comparing like 10 seats in New Hampshire versus 10 seats in Texas. But these races, used to cost. I remember when an expensive race was like in Virginia for that legislature, it was like $300,000
for the whole 2-year cycle, right? Yeah,
that was like 20 years ago, and that was like, whoa. Oh my gosh! Wow, so much. Oh my gosh!
And how much were those candidates raising last year when they took that legislature back?
Oh gosh, they were having the Democratic candidates were having months that would surpass that. So just on one side of the equation. They're very hard now.
So, and one of the things that really gave me a lot of hope for the future too is the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin in April.
Yep.
There's this middle of nowhere, not nowhere, but middle of the calendar, like nothing happening. And these are designed by Republicans to suppress liberal vote.
Right.
And
there was a pandemic on, and Republicans wouldn't delay the election because of the pandemic.
They wouldn't delay it. They wouldn't do vote by mail. They wouldn't do any of those things. And then we won by 10.
Mm-hmm.
Like that shows a maturing Democratic electorate. Republicans have always known this. They've always voted on courts. They've always voted on city council and school boards and that kind of race. We never did. Everybody was so freaking obsessed with the presidential. And that's always, I got in trouble with like a lot of the Bernie people. And it wasn't that I had a problem with Bernie. I had a problem with people so fixated on the president as the solution to all our problems when it's one piece of this broader, and I think we've evolved quite a bit beyond that.
We have, but I'm hopeful that we'll keep it up, after January. We'll see.
From your viewpoint, though,
a whole new set of problems. We're still dealing with coronavirus, racial justice, police reform, things like that. And so the political landscape for the next year is going to be unique. And Democrats who flip these chambers today will have a whole lot of problems to deal with. They'll be dealing with budget holes created by the lack of tax revenue.
Brutal.
Shut down. Democrats are walking into, they're going to be taking some power, but they're walking into a difficult situation for sure.
Totally. Kara, you sort of, obviously you keep a close eye on the youth vote and youth attitudes and whatnot. And so this whole idea that the presidency isn't the be all end all, do you see that sort of permeate into that world, younger voters?
Yeah, it's starting to for sure. I actually have a couple of friends who have run for office, which is amazing. Ana Escamani in Central Florida was a friend that I did college Democrats with at UCF, and she's like a rising star right now in Florida politics. It's starting to happen, and people are starting to see that it's accessible. But it's not fully, it's an education process that we need to do. And I mean, I'm an advocate for like wide form civics education in this country and being like, actually, you can run for local office at this age and you can raise a lot of money on websites like dailycoast.com. You can, seek endorsements from local newspapers, and young people my age.
Not kids. Now that you're 30. Now that you're 30, they're kids.
Now that I'm 30. No, young people really are so unbelievably tech savvy and such excellent communicators. There's all this rhetoric about how young people don't know how to talk to each other. And it's like, yeah, they're too busy crafting messaging and creating a brand for themselves. That is the makings of an incredible political movement. And I'm here for it. So it's a matter of educating the youth vote, but people are starting to see it. People are starting to get involved in their local races. And they're starting to understand that if you run for a local legislature, it's just a matter of how many doors you knock on and just $1,000 in some cases that you can raise. And they can do that online with nationwide support. So I think that we're going to see some really incredible young candidates in the state legislatures coming up, and it's going to be viral moment after viral moment, and I can't wait.
I love it.
Carolyn.
Oh, yeah, and a quick plug for Daily Kos and our work in this space this cycle. Daily Kos, the Daily Kos community has contributed more than $2.2 million to state legislative candidates to flip these chambers in advance of the next round of redistricting. It's so great.
So awesome. Carolyn, what do you think Donald Trump's going to do after the election if he loses?
I think find a country with no extradition treaty. But then start his own media company.
Does he have anybody around him that could start a media company? I mean,
I'm just not convinced the grift is over. I think people.
The grift is strong.
Sure.
So here, I actually looked at map of countries that have no extradition treaties with the United States, and the way it looks like the Americas are clear. Everybody has an extradition treaty. It's mostly Africa, Indonesia, and Russia and Saudi Arabia. So. He's not going to Africa.
Saudi Arabia. I think he's going to Saudi Arabia.
Well, they'll put big banners of him, right? He has fond memories of the big dictator.
I can't wait for the Daily Kos geographic just coverage about where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, but it's Donald Trump.
I'm so.
I'll live tweet it. You guys got it.
I'm here for that reference, and yes.
So, Carolyn, we are out of time. Oh my God, we are close to polls are closing, right?
Oh
yeah.
6:30, Indiana. Which, by the way, the fact that polls close at 6:30 p.m. in Indiana and Kentucky is absolutely ridiculous.
Correct.
Absolutely ridiculous. But, Carolyn, thank you so very much. Appreciate everything you do.
Howdy.
What's funny is when I asked her, how she saw the night was going, and she just tensed up. She did this.
I gotta be honest, I was doing all right, and then we've been talking, and I'm like, I got a little bit of back pain. I gotta stretch after this.
Oh man! Oh seriously, I tried to work out this morning, and it was just I was doom scrolling on the freaking Twitter.
No, we're hope scrolling. That's what the internet says to do. Hope scrolling. That's what we're doing today.
Oh, all right. I actually feel pretty good about this evening. If Florida goes to Biden early, and Florida's Florida. If we don't win Florida, it's okay. We don't need Florida.
Yeah.
But if it goes to Biden early, it means we can relax.
Yeah.
And I would love an evening where I'm just woo, we won Maine Senate race, right? As opposed to, oh crap, Arizona. Arizona, do your thing. Oh, now we got to wait for votes to be counted in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. I mean, we should expect Texas results today. So I'm not holding my breath, even though I'm very excited to see what the individual races at the state legislature are going to be. But I mean, could you imagine if we won Texas, we could be partying at 2 a.m. Because Texas is one of the few states where they actually are allowed to start counting early. So they are currently counting mail-in ballots as of as they were coming in.
Yeah,
so who's to say? Anything can happen.
So really hoping for an early night, but let's remember the White House isn't the only contest on the ballot. The control for the Senate, and I think it's not about simple control of the Senate. Simple control be okay. Be better than McConnell having control. But if we want things like statehood for DC and Puerto Rico, and new Voting Rights Act, and getting rid of the filibuster, and expanding the courts, that's going to require at least 53, ideally even more.
Yeah,
that's going to be a big part of the question, and also expanding control of the House. And it's less. We don't need the numbers. The House is a majoritarian body. We got already have a big majority. But what we're seeing is sort of the transition of these suburbs into Democratic strongholds, or at least battlegrounds, to strongholds. And Kara, I've been saying this fact forever. I don't know if you've heard it, but we won 41 seats in 2018, 38 of them in the suburbs. 38 of them in the suburbs. Rural areas, very few Democrats are left representing rural areas. One of the few is in Minnesota, and we're expecting to lose that. Very few. There's one urban district left in Democratic and Republican hands. That's in Miami, southern Florida. Mm-hmm. And that's a battleground district.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of core realignment coming, and this realignment is sort of important for what we do moving forward. And a big part of that realignment, obviously, is what we're seeing in that youth vote, Kara. So I'm really excited that you're tracking that and that you're covering that, and really interested to see after the election how you dig into that and how you sort of pull out the ultimate results. Because if those numbers that we're seeing already, you know, these multiples of 2016 vote, it dramatically shifts everything.
Absolutely. And I've been telling people, I'm like, hopefully my work starts in January, because we've all been playing at the offense with Trump in office. And I'm like, I'm here to talk about Medicare for all. I'm here to start lobbying people once COVID allows us to, and being like, hey, I think I deserve healthcare and to not be drowning in student debt. I don't know.
Crazy.
I'm
crazy.
I'm such a radical leftist. But
You don't want to die or be at the thumb of the banks. Yeah. Wow.
So I think, you know, that's where we're going to see the future is, can we push these people that we're electing tonight to do the things that we claim to stand for and really hold their feet to the fire?
And that's what we're going to build future gains on. It can't be go back to the status quo. It can't be business as usual.
Yeah.
It can't be, all right, Deutsche Bank, we're gonna bail you out of your $400 million Donald Trump loans, because this is what we do, is we bail out Wall Street, too big to fail. It's really pushing that progressive agenda. That's what people are voting for.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Barack Obama and the Democrats really missed in 2008, and it killed them in 2010. They weren't voting for Obama to work with Republicans and to give Mitch McConnell a veto. Mm-mm. They weren't doing that. They were voting for Obama's vision, and he decided that he'd rather try to bring the country together. That's not what people are voting for at this point. We've seen that. We've seen what the other side wants. It's not a compatible ideology or agenda. So it is, I think, imperative that moving forward, and this is going to be fun, I think, next year, is if we have a friendly presidency in Congress, is to push him to to do the right things. So, Kara, we're out of time.
Yes.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for joining me for this hour. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
Chatting again. Love you. Love you all. Love the work you're doing. And everybody watching, thank you for joining us in this special 2-hour edition of Daily Kos. This is The Brief. I'm happy that you've joined us. I hope that we made these last 2 hours a little PM 1:30 Pacific. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye. Let's win tonight.